With second straight week, the Cleveland Browns are going to face a playoff favorite, perhaps even an NFC championship betting favorite, the Green Bay Packers last week. We know how that went. This week, the Cleveland Browns will be on the road in Detroit Sunday, 1 o'clock. Let's face the Detroit Lions, who just had a pretty darn impressive victory over the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to break down some matchups, give some thoughts and predictions. The pregame show, Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network, begins now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. From the bottom of our hearts, we want to thank everybody for all the support here for the OBR, whether it's coming over to the OBR.com for the best Cleveland Browns coverage there is from our fantastic group of writers. While you're there, certainly look into the VIP access. We'll give you the Insiders Forum, Ask the Insiders. Your subscription will be bundled with Paramount Plus, which come January will pay some huge dividends as far as the UFC is concerned. To all of you that come out nightly for your support of the OBR streaming network beginning at 6 o'clock with Browns 3D, again, the support over there means a ton to us. We have had the growth double in less than a calendar year. We could not be more thankful and more appreciative. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. And of course, make sure you subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. At the time of this recording, we are still waiting, and we'll see if we get it before we put a wrap to this today on the final Detroit Lions injury report for this week 4 matchup, where the Lions are an 8.5-point favorite. For the Browns, everyone participated in practice on Friday. It's pretty simple injury-wise. Second-year defensive tackle Mike Hall still deemed not ready. Mike Hall will not suit up and is out for Sunday. My honest belief is we'll probably see Mike Hall week 6. With the Browns headed to Europe next week for that game on Sunday, it doesn't seem the ideal time for a player to be making his return from such a long and arduous time being away from the team. So my guess would be week 6 would probably be about the scenario where we can expect to see Mike Hall Jr. make his return to the Cleveland Browns. Things are going well. Coach Kevin Stefanski was asked in regards to Hall why he was not put on IR, because it would have been minimum 4 weeks, which would have been next week or the week after when Hall could have returned. Coach Stefanski did mention that there's certain liberties and certain things you're allowed to do as a player that is not on injured reserve as opposed to being on injured reserve. And some of those things certainly they thought were, good for Mike to be around the team more. And certainly, with the up and down of Mike, the early part of Mike Hall's rookie season with struggles off the field, I think that probably had something to do with the Browns trying to keep Mike as in the fold as they possibly could. Also, the defensive line has been really good. The defensive tackles are really good and really deep. And with everybody healthy, you needed somebody essentially to be a scratch each week. So it worked out in this scenario that keeping Hall on the 53 hasn't really cost the Cleveland Browns anything to this point. Jack Conklin will carry a questionable tag into Sunday against the Detroit Lions. From those I kind of reached out to a little earlier today, the belief is that Jack Conklin will not be a go on Sunday against the Lions. Look, this defensive front for the Detroit Lions is impressive. There's no way around it. Kind of performing on a level very similar to what the Cleveland Browns defensive line is doing right now. Just had, I believe it was 30 combined pressures against Lamar Jackson Monday night. Sacked Lamar Jackson 7 times. Lamar doesn't go down that often. That is a large number of sacks to have against Lamar Jackson. The 30 combined pressures is just an absolute insane number as well. So if Jack maybe 75 tops putting him out there against the likes of Aiden Huntington. I'm sorry. These two names are crushing me. Crushing me. Aiden Hutchinson, Aiden Huntington. Aiden Hutchinson is the one who plays for the Detroit Lions. It just doesn't seem like the best way to bring Conklin in. And if he's not 100%, and I've talked about this a million times before, Jack being an athletic offensive tackle, more of just a big, old, powerful ogre type. When Jack is not 100% of health, Jack's game severely deteriorates. So my guess certainly would be at this point that you're starting tackles on Sunday, of course, for the Browns. At left tackle, we will expect to see Cornelius Lucas, and at right tackle, we will expect to see KT Levinson. Your swing tackle, of course, would be Thayer Munford in his Cleveland Browns debut, and he's only been with the team and on the field for practices since Wednesday. I got to talk in a segment today with old friend Jeff Risdon. I'm sure plenty of you guys know him. Jeff Risdon, ran the Browns wire for a while. Jeff certainly, a Vermilion kid, a Browns guy at heart. Spent time covering the Texans, now up in Michigan, and he's been covering the Lions in a very lengthy role now for a decade plus. And Jeff was able to give some great insight to some of my thoughts, and then take some of that even deeper about this, Detroit Lions team overall. And there really is not a weakness with this Lions team on, any level on the offensive side of the ball or any level on the defensive side of the ball. Terrion Arnold, the corner, certainly, it's not been the best go for him yet. But to the point, Lions are 2-1. And, outside of offensive line struggles week 1 in Green Bay, this team the last 2 weeks, boat raced the Bears in week 2. And it was 38-23 up until the final seconds of that Lions-Ravens game. So let's not act like, that game was maybe, score definitive of the actual game. The Lions were up 15. We talked about Kirby Joseph, and Kirby Joseph, the free safety for the Lions, is a fantastic player. And remember putting a lot of time in on him his year coming out of Illinois. And good friend Stephen Thomas, no longer with the OBR. A lot of chatter about Kirby Joseph back in those days. It's rare when you get a guy who's just such a consistently good player at creating interceptions. It's one of the lost arts, in my opinion, overall in the NFL. I think a lot of interceptions these days, a lot of it are due to luck, as opposed to just a player just knowing how to get his hands on a ball that was not intended for him. And even though Joseph at times, certainly, he's got himself a little bit of a bad rap, certainly, with some of the hits and some of the physicality he's laid out. But his overall game has been regarded and revered. He's now being paid and paid extremely well by the Detroit Lions. He always finds a way to have an impact on a game. He is the guy when the Lions maybe don't even necessarily need it. The Lions could be, up 3 or could be up 14. And it's that Kirby Joseph interception that all of a sudden, breathes more life into the Lions. And then all of a sudden, the Lions just absolutely just start pouring it on you. I mentioned this yesterday. It could be 15 minutes of real time, and the Detroit Lions can hang 17 on anybody and not think twice about it. That's just how fast this team operates and just how good they can be at being, productive to the overall outcome on the defensive side of the ball. They give up yards, they commit penalties, but man, do they play at an aggressive style. It certainly bites them in the butt at times, but it certainly leads to them usually being the dictator of the game and its pace. I can combine Joseph's efforts and his abilities with Brian Branch, who's just been a really, really solid impact with the Lions as well. I'm talking about most likely the best safety combination there is currently. in the NFL. And, I think Brian Branch would be viewed and respected higher as a player in this league if it wasn't for the fact that his running mate at safety is just downright kind of dominant at times. So really, a week where I think we're all hoping that the Browns can kind of get the passing game going, can get the vertical passing game going, but yet your opponent has not one, but two incredible playmaking safeties in Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch. Now you get to, what's kind of been the difference, or at least was the difference last week for the Browns in finding a way to be competitive. And of course, that is with running the football. And, the efforts that Quinshon Judkins was able to give you last week. And then you keep adding in the fact that they were able to keep the game manageable for their offense time-wise, which also was manageable for their defense time-wise, didn't basically dry out or tire out the Cleveland Browns defense. But you think you're going to try and run this ball against the Detroit Lions, and you have Tyleik Williams, first-round defensive tackle, and he's kind of eased in pretty quickly. It's not always easy to be a first-round defensive tackle. Things don't necessarily go that smooth, Mason Graham notwithstanding, and Tyleik Williams, another one here, who is certainly kind of, maybe progressing and producing faster than expected. And of course, DJ Reader is just a player that I know Pete Smith and I were clamoring for a few years ago. We're hoping, praying somehow that when his time was done with the Cincinnati Bengals, he would make the trip up north to the real franchise in the state of Ohio. But instead, Reader is in Detroit. And understandable. Obviously, this team is two-time defending NFC North champions, and being a part of that defense. And, even still, if you can somehow create a hole for your running back to get through Reader and to get through Tyleik Williams, you're dealing with linebackers, Jack Campbell, who, I would say Carson Schlesinger, Jack Campbell, kind of very similar. Not necessarily your traditional undersized 2025 NFL linebacker, kind of bringing big back, both of them. But I mean, there's no question they're both athletic and they can do everything you ask for. And Alex Anzalone, who kind of been written off at points in the NFL just due to injuries, and got to Detroit and just kind of just fit in. And I think that's the thing that's really kind of impressive. You first off, you want to try and get scheme open, scheme through, scheme clean running plays, and even if you get through, you get to that second level, and it's Campbell and it's Anzalone. And I think there's a lot of parts of this Lions defense. Reader with his injuries, um, Al-Quadin Muhammad, who's currently filling in for Marcus Davenport at the defensive end position. And I believe he's had 3 sacks to this point. He's been really impressive. There's a lot of, for the first round picks that are with the Lions defense, you got some cast-offs that just, necessarily it just never worked out for them, or they kind of got, ignored by the franchises they were with. And so, you got some, used to be's or never was's. And, they've kind of found their way to Detroit and just really kind of blended in. Because the defense for Detroit, hand in hand, without question, with the Lions offense. This is not just a team where you talk about one side of the ball and it being the more prominent side. That is a myth. The Lions can play really good defense. They are tough against the run. They can certainly get after the passer. They certainly create turnovers. And that's before you kind of truly get to their offense. The Browns, I keep saying it. You got to take a shot or two to keep the defense honest, to maybe loosen things up. I understand the reasons that they're maybe not doing that, but this has always been my thing with the Stefanski offense is when you are not taking a shot or two, you are essentially playing arena football and you are trying to beat good defenses with death of a thousand paper cuts. And it is just not a sustainable thing to do in today's NFL. Now, you flip the script and trying to beat this Lions offense. And this is where it really kind of gets tough, because you have the home run hitting running back in Jameer Gibbs. And for those that believe that's all Gibbs is, you go back in time and look at some of these Lions games where they did not have David Montgomery. And, you give Gibbs a heavier workload and, Gibbs gives you, 24, 25 carries for 175, 180 yards, 4 touchdowns. So the fact that he gets a lighter load because he plays with another running back who demands carries as well does not tell you that, Jameer Gibbs is, just this one trick pony. And Detroit certainly loves involving him out of the backfield. And I think he's improved a little bit with each year in the league as far as what he can give you as a receiver, of course. David Montgomery is kind of, well, I'd say good Derrick Henry, but good Derrick Henry light. Whereas Montgomery, again, he is just an absolute load to deal with. He runs physical. He, bringing him down usually brings more pain to the guy dragging him to the ground than pain that is brought to Montgomery himself. You've got the absolute home run hitter, probably all home run hitters at wide receiver in the NFL today in Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams, the ball gets in his hands, it's a chunk play. It's a field flipper almost all the time. And that's just kind of the ability Jameson Williams has. There's some that say that he's probably underachieved a little bit his time in the NFL. And I guess if you base it on that final year and that final season down at Tuscaloosa at Alabama, it's not an all, it's not nothing to, I would say, argue over. And, maybe if he thought Jameson Williams was going to translate to pure, true, overall number one wide receiver, then I guess it would be safe to say that maybe he has underachieved as per his draft status. That's fair, I'd say. But part of the reason that Jameson Williams only gets the looks that he gets is everywhere else. Amon St. Brown, whose versatility and the fact that he plays slot almost more, probably over a 50% rate than he plays on the outside, and just absolutely crushes it wherever you put him. So it doesn't matter actually where you line him up because he succeeds certainly from any area that you put him in. He is able to make plays. He is their money guy, their 3rd and 6th guy. He had a huge one Monday night against Baltimore, and it was a great sell of a run block. And he kind of curled right behind Marlon Humphrey, and Humphrey was, toast from basically the first split second of the play. And the reason those plays work for a team like Detroit, and whether it is Williams, whether it is Amon St. Brown or Tesla, they block. They block extremely well. It is not just, a passing phrase in Detroit that their wide receivers need to block. It is taken, and it is taken seriously by this Detroit wide receiver core that they need to be part of the running game. They need to be an extension of the offensive line within the running game. Their blocking is counted on, and it is not asked, it is demanded, and these guys certainly deliver. Sam Laporte has always been a really, really good player, and I think Sam Laporta would certainly be viewed a lot higher throughout the rest of the NFL if it wasn't for the fact that this is such a balanced skill group in Detroit. Any one of these guys, whether it's Gibbs, Montgomery, Amon St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Laporta, any one of these guys is capable of dropping 100 yards in a bat of a hat. That's how good these guys are collectively and all around. So it's kind of a pick your poison if you're a defense and you're facing this Detroit Lions offense. The offensive line, the interior struggled a little bit week one. I think getting to see the Bears in week two probably got them feeling better about themselves, and it certainly showed with the success they had against the Bears. And then they just absolutely gutted the Ravens defense running the ball on this past Monday night. And it's really become a quick growth process for the interior guards. Certainly Frank Ragnow, very late in the process, just, had to tap out because his body was not going to be able to go. So, had to call it quits and retire, which certainly was a devastating blow for Detroit. But when you're a good team collectively and you're deep, you have that belief that, there's no one man that's going to hold back of a roster of 53. And that has certainly been the case for Detroit right now. Goff, and the thing with Goff, and he's not the most mobile guy. I wouldn't say his arm is elite. And I was a Jared Goff guy coming out of Cal. Absolutely loved Jared Goff. And, not a ton of athleticism. He has only been sacked 4 times to this point. The Cleveland Browns had 4 sacks alone last week. Now, you have to believe the Browns are certainly going to get their opportunities, to get physical with Jared Goff and hopefully get Jared Goff, to the ground. I wouldn't suggest blitzing him. His numbers against the blitz are almost better than they are against straight coverage. Now, that's crazy to believe, but it just shows, the quarterback intellect of Jared Goff. And if you're going to bring it, you're not hiding it from Jared Goff. Jared Goff sees it. He recognizes it. And most of the time, the ball is going right to the spot where the blitzer came from. Jared Goff is a highly intelligent quarterback. And to think he played with McVay for all those years, got to a Super Bowl and played extremely well, and then went that crazy trade where Stafford went out west and Goff obviously came to Michigan to play for the Lions. And Goff has just not missed a beat, and he's probably a better version of himself now quarterbacking the Detroit Lions than he was even going to a Super Bowl with Sean McVay and the Los Angeles Rams. Penny Sewell. And Penny Sewell apparently last week put up almost a perfect run blocking score against the Baltimore Ravens. Basically almost kind of broke the PFF metric with how well he played. But the Browns have to have their defensive line eat. Right now, it's not a question of which recipe the Browns use to remain competitive within a football game. I think the only recipe the Cleveland Browns have right now to remain competitive in a football game is for their defensive line to eat and eat well. They've shown the ability, of course, to disrupt the run. First 3 games, Chase Brown, Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, all 3 name brand running backs, now running back ones for their respective teams. 48 carries for 96 yards, 2 yards per carry to this point in those first 3 games. Now, they're certainly going to need that kind of effort here this week against Detroit. Lock them into certainly the obvious passing situations, and then hope like hell you can find a way to cover Amon St. Brown. And I'm not exactly sure what the game plan is, because when we talk about Amon St. Brown and the fact that he lines up almost more than 50% of the time as a slot receiver, That means it's Miles Harden, because that's a hell of an ask of Miles Harden to basically say, "Yeah, you got Amon St. Brown, that's your dude." We mention it all the time and certainly mention it now for 8 seasons. Would it be the time to ask Denzel Ward to go eliminate the biggest risk, even if the biggest risk means that Denzel is kicking inside more than we have ever seen him do in his time, of course? The Browns are really, I think, as much as last week's win was a feel-good moment for the Browns, I think the way they kinda snuck up and sniped the Green Bay Packers last week, I think that's probably going to cause a disservice to them this week and maybe even next week against the Vikings, in the fact that nobody is gonna be caught off guard against this Cleveland Browns defense or this Cleveland Browns team overall anymore this season. Basically went 56 minutes and change last week, didn't put any points on the board, and before the final 0 rung on the board, the Browns quickly found a way to rally for 13 points and walk out of a home victory with a 13-10 victory over the Green Bay Packers. But I don't think anybody is, not noticing now this Cleveland Browns team and their capabilities and what they can possibly do, even to a team as talented and deep as the Detroit Lions. Andre Schmidt, happy birthday. Player of the week, obviously, and then goes and takes home, of course, takes home the title, and then, of course, comes on in with a birthday, trying to continue the positivity for Andre Schmidt as we head on indoors to Detroit on Sunday. My belief, is that Schmidt could be part of a winning recipe here, certainly for the Browns. You don't want to get into a game where you're field goal dependent with your young kicker, Andre Schmidt, but he has certainly shown he is capable of rising to the occasion. We got to see that, of course, last week. Browns are going to need to run the ball and run the ball a lot and run the ball with success and not, the 30-yard runs that Quinshon Judkins was able to throw up in back-to-back weeks. It has to be, again, 4, 5 yards, 6 yards, 2 yards, 7 yards. You need to maintain that close to 4.5 to 5 yard per carry average. Certainly easier said than done when you're talking about the Detroit Lions defense. But you need to slow the game down to a crawl. You need to keep the Lions offense off the field. You need to keep your defense rested so they can kind of go full tilt at any given time against this Detroit offense. It's going to be another huge test for the Browns. And if the Browns can get this game to the fourth quarter where they are still within a drive, I think you would call that success. Because the Detroit Lions right now are in the business of kind of reminding everybody, I don't care that Micah Parsons is in Green Bay. Stop anointing J.J. McCarthy just because he had some highlights in the 2024 preseason. And I think we've heard enough about our old friend Ben Johnson, who's the head coach of the Chicago Bears. The Detroit Lions right now are in the business of reminding everybody just who in the hell runs the NFC North. And that is the Detroit Lions. The Browns are going to come and they're going to give them everything they got this week. It may not be a victory Monday when it's all said and done for the Cleveland Browns after playing Detroit. But I think the Browns are going to stay close or closer than some teams have had stayed with the Detroit Lions. But I think the Browns are going to ultimately fall short. So I will say 24-16, the Detroit Lions take out the Cleveland Browns on Sunday. Hope for a win. Always want to win. But we got to be realistic at points. Appreciate everybody for showing their support here to the OBR. Come into the OBR.com to get the best Cleveland Browns coverage there is. Make sure you look into the VIP access, insider forums, ask the insiders. Your subscription gets bundled with Paramount Plus. And, everybody comes on out beginning at 6 o'clock nightly to the OBR streaming network, beginning with Browns 3D. And then, of course, various shows throughout the rest of the week, after 6 o'clock, after Browns 3D. We could not be thankful again. The growth has 100% grown in less than a calendar year. We could not be more thankful for all of you for the support. Subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Subscribe to the OBR over on Twitch. We'll have a post-game show for you Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern. Be there or be square. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network, and we will talk to you all on Sunday.